Today we are here in the Nevada Supreme Court building in Carson City to interview Sandra Marz, who retired in 2009 after serving for 30 years as director of the Washoe County Law Library in Reno. Sandy, let's begin with a little personal history. Could you tell us a bit about where you were raised in your life, both when you were young and today?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Stockton, California. My father sold advertising for the local newspaper, and I stayed at home mom, and I have one younger sister. So I lived there till I went to college, and I lived in Nevada for more than 30 years. I've been retired for 4 years. I'm still involved with the ALL. I was involved with the recent passage of UALMA, the Uniform Legal Materials Act, at the recent Nevada legislature. I'm on some state court and county law library committees. I'm also on the Nevada State Council for Libraries and Literacy, sorry. And that we rate grants for, we give out grant funding for LSTA projects. I'm on the Nevada Women's Fund Board. We raise money for scholarships for women and give grants to agencies that support their families. And recently I was on part of the Nevada Governor's Cup competition, which is it's for undergraduate and graduate college students who are going to start their own businesses, and they can earn some money to start their own businesses. So I rated business plans for that project. So that was a lot of fun.
Sounds like you sort of keep busy,
yeah.
In interesting ways. Oh, that's good. Could we kind of go back a bit and talk
Sure.
a little bit about your education and professional training? For example, what degrees do you hold, and where did you go to college and library school?
Well, when I was growing up, I was always in the equivalent of advanced placement classes, and it was assumed I would go to college, but there was no ever plan for college. I think a lot of my friends were in that category. My friends that went away to school had parents who went to those schools. They went to Mills and Stanford and Amherst, and their children went there too. And the rest of us ended up going to junior college, and California had a very good junior college system at the time. There was one college, private, University of Pacific's in Stockton, but it's an expensive private school, and none of us could afford it. So I went to junior college for a year, but the problem was we had the same kids in our classes we did when we were in high school. The same advanced placement group, and and the college was a block away from my house, and I just really wanted to go away. My stepfather is Mormon, so he gave me the opportunity to go to BYU. So I went to BYU, and I majored in humanities, history of Western culture, and I really enjoyed it. And I got married right after I graduated from college, and I had children, and so and then. Later on, I had a friend who was the head of a special collections library at University of Nevada, and she worked part-time, and I thought, well, gosh, that would be a great part-time job. She had a professional library degree, and so I went back to school to BYU. There was no online library schools at that time, so I went back to BYU and got my library degree. When I was done, I came back to Reno, but there really weren't any jobs anywhere. Reno is a great place to work, but people who have professional jobs don't change very often. So there really weren't any openings. And I got a part-time temporary position at University of Nevada in the government documents collection, working their federal depository program. And then a friend of mine saw an ad in the paper for a library assistant job at Washoe County Law Library. And of course, I didn't want to be a library assistant, but I applied for it anyway. I needed a job, and the person who was the head of the library at that time, Mary Ann Royal, offered me the job because she wanted to start a federal depository program at the Washoe County Law Library. So I went to work there and worked on that project, and we shared depository status with the Nevada Historical Society, so I got to know the Historical Society pretty well also. And by the end of the year, she changed my position to professional position. So, and then she applied for a grant to get Westlaw at the library. So we had the first Westlaw in the state. And I'd say the next year I spent training people how to use Westlaw and showing them how to use it. And she also encouraged me to go to ALL, and I started going then and been involved ever since. So she left after about 2 years. She was married to Blair Kaufman at the time, who was the head of the library at the Judicial College in Reno. And he got a job at Northern Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And so they moved there, and I applied for the director of the library job and got that, and was director for the next 28 years.
Mm-hmm. Along the way, you mentioned the cost of education.
Yeah.
You know, that was sort of prohibitive even in our day.
Yeah.
It's more so today. BYU, I had friends there, and Brigham Young, because of the church, basically could charge less for tuition than
Mm-hmm.
was sort of the perceived going rate for institutions on their level. And I remember at one point talking to some friends in the law school, and they had done a survey. And they picked up in the survey of potential students that there was a negative perception of the school from some, because for some reason it was underpriced
Oh.
compared to what the going rate was. And they were, like so
Oh.
many of us Americans, you think you get what you pay for,
Yeah.
and then you complain about it.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that I can see how people would think that, and yet it was sort of a clever idea by the church, the Mormon Church, to they tithe its members, and part of that money goes
Mhm.
to BYU. And then, if you remember who my stepfather was, he'd given us tithing, and so when you go to BYU, you pay less tuition than a non-tithed person.
I mean, you're paying it one
Yeah.
way or the other. But,
Yes, you do. They
yeah.
paid it all along. It's kind of a reward for.
Yeah. Well, it's an excellent school from everything I've ever heard, and the people I've known from there I've thought very highly of. And I don't know what they did about this perception. I guess they knew about it, but I think the church kept the subsidy up, so
Yeah.
that was good.
Yeah.
People could afford to go there. Well, you've had some interesting experiences here in the Reno area. Not the least of which, and from my perspective, because I came for it, was the 1989 annual meeting of the American Association of Law Libraries, which was held in Reno that year. And you had the distinct honor, or whatever one would call it, of being chair of the Local Arrangements Committee. And in those days, that was more of a burden than it is perhaps today, because one of the things AELL has been able to do in the time since is expand the people at its headquarters who are now available to take some of these responsibilities off of members, and thereby make it a little bit easier. But so you worked under the old rules, and I remember the hotel we were in was unique, and that I don't think I've ever been to one at another ALL meeting where it was you come in, and instead of a lobby in the traditional sense, there's a casino.
Yeah.
And we enjoyed that, and there was plenty to do all the time, and it was actually a wonderful meeting, and enjoyed it very much. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience, though, and some of the things and what it perhaps got you involved in, perhaps later on, that kind of thing?
I saw that the Reno annual meeting was going to be in Reno, and I think an ALL newsletter. I mean, it hadn't been proposed by any group from Reno. I don't know how it was picked, but once I saw that it was going to be in Reno, I contacted the person who would be president at that time, Margaret Leary, and asked if I could be local arrangements chair or participate in some way, and she agreed, and she appointed me local arrangements chair. I knew that the hotel casino would be kind of an adjustment for everybody else. All of our other meetings have been in larger cities that I can remember anyway at that point, where you walked out of the hotel and there were all these things to do. I mean, you didn't have to really take too much public transportation. There was just museums and things to do. But when you walk, and not that there aren't those things available in Reno, but when you walked out of that particular hotel, there was nothing around it. You actually needed a car, Reno has public transportation, but it's not efficient like bigger cities. So I really wanted people to come and have a good time and not pay so much attention to the casino if that made them uncomfortable. And all the other annual meetings I've been to, they had like the character of the city somehow in the, you know, opening reception or at the other events, so everybody could network and feel very comfortable. And so I really wanted to create that atmosphere. So through the newsletter, I tried to encourage people to come and rent a car and drive up to like Tahoe and see the beauty of the outdoors in Reno or around Reno, or take one of the planned tours we offered. And you know, I remember walking out of the hotel into the parking lot one day, and the person who was the president of West Publishing Company was standing outside, and he just loved breathing the fresh air, and you know, he was really enjoying himself. So I really hoped many people had that experience. Also, I wanted people to have a lot of fun when they came to Reno, and I had seen on television another organization that came to town had a rodeo.
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
And I wanted to do the same thing for our opening reception. And Bill Jepson, who was with AL at the time, gave me the names of some vendors who might want to sponsor the opening reception, and I pitched the idea to them, and Lexus agreed to do it. I also had interview and hire a local event planning group, because the rodeo association, the Reno Rodeo is a big deal in many western states, and the Reno Rodeo Association had a contract where they had exclusive rights to the area that we needed to have our rodeo. So we had to get them to agree to use the space and also to put on a small rodeo for us, which they finally did. And so I thought it was a lot of fun. I hope everybody did too. When I talked to Westlaw about what they were planning for their party, they wanted to do something similar, not quite the same, and I encouraged them not to do that. And they eventually had a talent contest. And they had chapter competition, which I thought was a lot of fun, and it created participation among the people that came, so I thought that was a lot of fun. I hired Ruby D for our closing banquet speaker. We had previously had speakers at our closing dinner that I thought were a lot of fun. I can remember Father Guido Sardici was, I think, maybe in Washington, D.C.
That was in Washington, D.C.
And I loved
yes.
him. He was a lot of fun. But I thought maybe we ought to go to a little bit different direction, and I was pleased with the results. Ruby D was a wonderful person. She was really professional. I guess she had a death in the family the week before, like her sister or somebody died, and she showed up anyway and was very professional, did a wonderful job. I think some of the things that were different also about the meeting, we had the first local arrangements committee that was mostly people from out of Reno, out of state. Susan Southwick from Carson City was on the committee. Suzanne Miller, I can't remember everybody, but these are a few that I remember.
Yeah.
Suzanne Miller was from Sacramento. Michelle Finnerty from Orange County. Then Ken Halicki from Chicago was the registration chair, and someone else picked him, but he was wonderful because he had a lot of experience, and he was our registration chair. And Frank Liu from Pittsburgh was the newsletter editor. Mark Esses was education chair that year. And at that point, ALL had hired a professional company to manage the exhibit hall. So that was maybe one of their first, I don't know if ours was the first meeting, but they'd made a step in that direction.
Actually, the one in Detroit a few years earlier was the first.
Oh, was it?
And the reason I know that is that Steve Marsden and I managed the exhibit hall at one of the meetings in Washington, D.C.
Oh, did you?
And we were the last year.
Yeah.
But it was all member given. And it was an interesting experience.
Yeah.
I mean, we sat there one day, what do we charge the vendors?
I know.
And nobody knew.
I know.
And the executive board's supposed to set this up. Well, nobody knew that either. Yeah. So we looked up to see what they paid the previous years for a few years. And then we just added a little bit to that and said, this is the new rate.
Yeah.
And that's what it was.
Yeah.
So you were working with professionals a bit there, but not totally.
No. Well, what happened was Bill Jepson left ALL while we were planning for this. And there was no executive director until several months before the meeting. So we went through a long period where I did a lot of the work, and yet I really enjoyed it. Do you know what I mean? It was really a lot of work in addition to my regular job, but I really enjoyed doing it and being involved in all aspects of the annual meeting. So
Well, you
It's a great
mentioned,
experience.
yeah, you mentioned the rodeo, and I remember that. We enjoyed it immensely. I mean, we walked over, it wasn't far from the hotel, and sat in the stands, and
Yeah.
along came this stagecoach.
I know.
And Margaret Leary, who was president,
Yeah.
stepped out, and Babe Russo,
Yeah.
who was the executive secretary at headquarters and had been for many years, stepped out. And I recall that it was, the field was a tiny bit more muddy than I
Yeah.
think they had expected, but it was a lot of fun and
Yeah.
a lot of show. And it was a nice evening. I also, with a group, got a rental car, and we went over to Tahoe. And I had never seen it before, and it was sort of fun to drive around, with one exception. Now, we stopped for lunch at a place, and I ended up getting food poisoning.
Oh, did you?
Oh, and had an interesting trip back to the hotel, but we made it, or I made it just fine. But it was a lot of fun. We stood up at one point. There's a falls, I guess, on the side away from where all the hotels and casinos were. And we could stand up there and look out over most of the lake. It was really very picturesque. Everything you said it was going to be.
Well,
Yeah,
it's a beautiful place.
it really is. So you had an interesting time, and this sort of acted as a catalyst, I guess, I know, to you becoming a little more active in other things of the association and other association.
Well, I've been
as
involved
well.
in some committees, but I think once you chair an annual meeting, you get to meet so many people that opportunities just to come your way, people think of you more. And so I was on lots of committees and chairs and committees, and I think 2 years after the annual meeting, I was on the education committee for the annual meeting 2 years later. President of Westpac, which I really enjoyed. It's kind of challenging though, because the members are from all these less populated western states, even including Hawaii, so we had to travel quite a distance to have our meetings. One year I was awards chair for ALL, which was great because you get to reward those who've done exceptional work, and you get to see the work that's been done, but that's everything from PR to the Gallagher Awards, a wide range of
I'm going to be
awards.
on that committee this next year.
Yeah.
I volunteered, and the president-elect still, I guess, the new president, chose me. So it'll be an interesting experience.
Yeah.
I've never actually been part of that committee.
You'll really like it. It's really wonderful. You get more names. It's hard to make some of the decisions. Yeah.
Well, I was involved with the group that selected the inaugural members of the ALL's Hall of Fame about 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
We had the people who'd received the Gallagher Award were automatic admits to that. But we went back in history, and it was fun. It was fascinating to go back and look at all those old law library journals and other things to try and figure out who really was who in those days, and did they do anything that would merit, being considered for being on the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And we had criteria that the board had promulgated to us, and we were following that, but it was a lot of fun. And one of the things, I may be speaking out of school, but I have suggested to the new chair of the committee is that perhaps the committee should look for someone from history who we think would not only merit being on the Hall of Fame, because they presumably already are, but would also merit the Gallagher Award, which can be given, of course, after someone is deceased, and it has been. And perhaps pick a few really significant people over the years from the early years of ALL, and recognize them, sort of with the Gallagher Award. I think it would lend even more credence to that award as being a recognition of that kind of achievement. So we'll see. But, so you've been there and done that with the awards committee, and you've been chair of the Western Pacific chapter.
And I was chair of state court and county law libraries, which I really like, because that's the SIS I'm most associated with and spent most time with. And as part of being a chair, you get to learn more about the funding issues from other states. I mean, people from other states call you and want your assistance. So It was a great thing to do. I was nominations chair, which I liked. I always say that's, you get to pick other people to do work, you know, but they're for leadership
You're
roles.
exempt from being nominated that
I know,
year, since that
that's
would be
right.
considered nepotism.
That's right. And then I got to be represented to the National Center for State Courts.
Mhm.
And then Tori Trott invited me to go with her to the Assembly of Court Associations, which was, I didn't even know existed. Very interesting group.
Mhm.
I formed an informal group in Nevada called Neville, Nevada Law Librarians, and we got together once a year and different parts of the state, learned about each other's law libraries, and then when we were working on projects together, got support from other members of the group. For example, Jennifer Gross, who's at UNLV Law Library,
Mhm.
was the editor of that's called Nevada Legal Research Guide, and she got people to, author different chapters. So it was a good group.
Mhm. Well, it sounds like you've blossomed after that experience of being
Yeah.
in local arrangements.
Yeah.
I shared a little of that in my first year out of school. I was the associate law librarian at the University of Houston. And Al Coco was our director, or law librarian as we called him in those days. Lolly Gassaway was
Mhm.
part of the group. And, all people who've gone on to good things, I
Yeah.
hope. Maybe I have too, I don't know. But Al Coco, several years earlier, the annual meeting was slotted to be held in Dallas. And the librarian at SMU up there, Southern Methodist, was planning a new building. It turned out to be for the same summer. And so she said that she didn't really feel that they could do both adequately, and the priority had to be obviously the new building. So Coco had said, well, we're getting our building the previous year, and we'll do it. And the executive board had decided to take that offer up real quick.
Yeah.
So we were going to be the local arrangements. Well, as it turned out, that was a wild summer. Our building had been postponed a year. So we were getting our new building at the same time we were doing the local arrangements for the incoming meeting. And it was interesting because there weren't an awful lot of us in Houston who were law librarians
Yeah.
either in those days. And local arrangements consisted mostly of Al Coco and those of us that worked with him, including the non-librarians on the staff and even the students who were around in the summer. And we had more fun doing it. And in those days, we did it all just as you did, pretty much, for the most part. And you do get to know people really well,
Yeah.
very rapidly.
Yeah.
And I remember I had the opportunity. Here's a brand newly minted law librarian who's come into the group, and Al asked me to introduce one of the presentations. We were talking about the new building that we were actually going to move into in 3 weeks or 4 weeks after this meeting. It was wild. But we had everyone from the convention hotel. We bussed them out to the university to look at this fabulous, we thought, new building at the time. And didn't have any books on the shelf or anything. They were all still in the
Yeah.
basement of the old university library where we had been. And he asked me to introduce to the group what we were going to be seeing as we walked through the building. And, it was really a nice experience. So in a sense, you and I share some of that, the catalyst of being in that particular kind of role. I wasn't chair, but I certainly, Al gave me some very prominent position
You feel
in
more
there.
involved, don't you?
You really do, and
Yeah.
it became, just something from then on, I wanted to be part of.
Yeah.
And go to the annual meetings and so on, and it sounds like you had exactly the same kind of experience, and then developed other interests as well, which connected back into the field. Sounds like you had an interesting time, at the very least. One of the things as we near the end of this interview, Sandy, is that I give the person who is being interviewed sort of the last word, even though I sometimes cheat and chime in afterwards, but I'm just incorrigible when it comes to that kind of thing. But is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention before we close this interview?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about just a little bit about my years at the Washoe County Law Library.
Okay.
I was there for 30 years. I'm not sure I intended to stay that long, but it turned out to be a good experience. And sometimes when I had opportunities to leave, like for instance, my daughter was in high school and I didn't want to make a change while she was in high school, or there were some good opportunities, jobs that were open towards the end of my career, but I didn't want to change. I had so much investment in our local retirement system. You become more practical at that point, and I stayed. But I had this wonderful board of trustees. Some of the people that were on my board of trustees were on there for years. The state statute changed about the time I became director of the library to include 2 non-attorneys as well as attorneys and 3 judges. And so we had an interesting group. Some of my board members stayed on for years. Some of them went on to great things. 2 of them are Nevada Supreme Court justices, and one's a federal judge, and our current governor was on my board for many years and in fact worked at the library as a library aide. And so I had great support from the Bar Association. Our Bar Association always had a gift fund for us. They voted to donate part of their dues to the gift fund for the law library. So they invested that. So we always had extra money when we needed it. Mostly it was to be for legal resources, but we upon occasion used it for other things. For example, when we were planning for a new library, they gave us money for a consultant to plan the space, and they bought us new computers for the library. When I started our Lawyer in the Library program, which I want to say I was inspired by Pam Gregory's program that she had. Ours is a little different. We modified it, but we had a Lawyer in the Library program. Washoe County Association members volunteered their time to take part in that program, and that grew. We eventually had one night for general legal information and one night for family issues, and then we had seminars once a month, like on topics like immigration law or Social Security disability, and then eventually those were filmed and they're online. So people could watch them from home. Just a great group of people that I worked with there, and I think that's part of the reason I ended up staying at the same place for so long.
I noticed in looking at your background that one would not legitimately refer to you as a job hopper.
No, I know.
And a lot of us settled in places for a long time. You get comfortable, you get to know the people, and they get to know you, and you work well. And sounds like you had a lot of that same experience.
I did. And I had some really great people that worked for me too. Some of the projects we had were because they had people who came to work. Sometimes it was like their first job out of library school, and they had different talents, so we used them for different things. For example, one of them wrote a history of the law library. It was formed in 1915, and so he wrote a history of the law library, and then we had an 80th anniversary party, and Bob Baring came to speak, and we had a nice event. And another one was good at giving presentations and good with internet, so she gave presentations to county employees about how to look for legal resources on the internet. And so we had lots of projects. I had some great employees during that time as well. So it was just a good fit, of people and resources.
One cannot be too quick to give that kind of an opportunity up when it develops. And it develops because you obviously worked on developing it.
Well, that's both.
Well, I think give the devil their due.
I really liked...
the librarian has to work hard to nurture those sorts of relationships that are so important to the ongoing operation of the library in a proper sense. It sounds like you had a lot of those opportunities, and that's good, I think.
Well, actually went on later to get an MBA because my favorite part was managing the library
Uh-huh.
and then also putting these projects together. So I never did anything with the MBA. I was planning to, but never really did. But I really just adds another perspective to what you're doing. You
Mhm.
know?
Well, as head of the library, you are responsible for its overall management, and that includes keeping track of what's being done internally,
Mhm.
but also presenting to the outsiders what they need to know as well about the operation. And of course, especially when you're looking for resources from the
I
outside.
know. I was always looking for resources.
And we're all in that game, one way or another.
Yeah.
There's never that much money lying around any place that they're just giving it away for
No.
free.
No.
Yeah. Is there anything more before we conclude?
No, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed, ALL made my tenure at the library really special as well. I mean, I know people in other professions who have professional organizations, and I don't know that they got as much out of their professional organization as I have. I mean, I feel like ALL gives us a lot of support, provides a lot of friendships. We learn things from other people in ALL, you know. Not necessarily, the programs are great, but not necessarily in programs, but by speaking with them.
I think that's the real advantage of our association and our profession. We're small enough still, even today,
Mhm.
that we really do get to know each other. And I've noticed it in going around doing these interviews for the oral history project. I'm seeing colleagues, many of whom I knew for many years. And I remember it just struck me early on that reconnecting with them was like we had lunch last week.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's
and,
true.
we just picked right up from there, and
Well, some of my best friends still are from ALL. That's where I know them from.
Yeah,
So,
I have exactly the same thing, and it's nice. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you. There is one question I normally ask, and I didn't earlier, but I will. You sort of alluded to some people who kind of worked and assisted in helping you become a law librarian. Is there anyone in particular you want to mention that played a major role, or maybe more than one, in that process by which you decided to become a law librarian, as opposed to some other kind of librarian, or do something else with eventually with the MBA?
well, there's so many people, I just can't think of one or two. I
Mhm.
think the way I got into law librarianship was kind of an accident, but it turned out to be good. And the person that I started with, Marianne, really gave me these professional opportunities right away. So that's part of, and she encouraged me to go ALL. So I think that was kind of the catalyst for moving forward. If not for that, I probably would have. I was offered other jobs that I didn't take. I was offered a job as a school librarian, which actually paid more at the time than I was making, and decided I didn't want to do that. Again, there's almost too many people. I can't think of one or two that I would single out. But
Well, it sounds like you had an interesting and fascinating and challenging
Yeah.
career, as many of us have. And I want to thank you, Sandy, for visiting with us today, and for telling us a bit about this, some of these experiences, and especially about the annual meeting that you basically hosted and managed for the association. It was an interesting experience, and I'll tell one more story about it.
Okay.
When I was here, Frank Sinatra, not son, but the father,
I remember
was
he
still
was there.
around, and
Yeah.
he was performing.
he was.
And a number of us
hotel.
went to that
Yeah.
one of those performances, and I have never seen anything quite like it. I mean, he went on for at least an hour and a half with no break, and it was really a very polished show, and very enjoyable, as the whole meeting really was. And, so, why not be adventuresome and try the cities that we don't always visit.
That's true.
And Reno was one of them.
Yeah.
And that's good. Well, thank you again for your time this morning.
Thank you.